Episode 2, the CEO, Servant or Sovereign? Welcome back. This is Episode 2 of our podcast. Last week you may remember that we just gave a broad introduction and we spoke a bit about the ICAC hearings in Parramatta Council and their application to wider governance issues in probably all local governments and things that have been said as, that's normal practice. So today's topic is about the CEO of councils. Now, the CEO of councils is a very powerful position. It's the link between the operational world and what should be the strategic world, but we talk a bit more about that. So we'll talk about the job on paper, what the legislation provides, and perhaps what the duty statement provides, and I laugh at that because of our recent experience with our CEO. And we're going to talk about what happens when it goes wrong, what councillors may or may not be able to do, depending whether they're in the ruling block or not, and what you yourself can do. And we may be talking about GIPA, which we'll cover in next week's show.
Structurally, a council has a governing body that sits over the top, of course, which are elected councillors. The people choose their people to represent them at a council level. That's very important to understand, that there is a governing body. They're not a board of directors. They are a governing body elected by the people. That's the first thing. It's their job to choose an operational head. Now, an operational head, sometimes referred to as CEO, sometimes referred to as a general manager. Either of those terms are interchangeable depending on the council. But that's the only position that a council has buy-in into in choosing. And that's really important when we're about to go and talk about what's happening at Shoalhaven. Again, it's endemic across a lot of councils, how they're chosen, why they're chosen, and the process that sits behind the selection of a CEO. All of those items become integral to the conversations we have following and what power they actually have. And it's well and good to say they are the operational head, but in fact, as we know, that has gone further than that in a lot of cases in councils where they see themselves as sitting over the top of the governing body. It's very easy for them to do that. For any of us who've worked in an environment like that, we know knowledge is power, and they control the in and out of every bit of information. Therefore, they control the power. And it's really limiting for a governing body with a interfering CEO who prevents certain councillors from having information whilst providing another group of councillors with all the information.
Yeah.
It is not.
So Maree, we've both seen and both are only too well aware of the issue of the governing block within a council. So for here in the Shoalhaven, the governing block is the Shoalhaven Independent Group, SIG. They hold the numbers, including one of their members who is probably very independent and will vote with the other councillors, but still they have the numbers. And with the appointment of Andrew Constance, which is currently under investigation by the Office of Local Government, you've got the Mayor and the CEO who have had a 25-year relationship, both active Liberal Party members, and she was mentioned in his maiden speech in Parliament, very close. So you've got in this case, a very interesting issue. He's got power in his own right. The Mayor's got power, but in fact, he actually holds more power than the Mayor.
And that's certainly concerning. And I think you guys are seeing evidence of that relationship and then the impact that has on not only the other council members, but also the staff. Because instead of people being able to perhaps go to the Mayor and say, I've got a problem with the general manager, or vice versa, and an instance of that arose in Shoalhaven Council where there was an incident with a CEO and went to the Mayor, and those two left it and didn't talk about it for a month, and it festered like a sore and it became a very unfortunate situation. I think any of us who have watched the media would know the details around that. It was pretty poor handling and governance overall. But that's when you have a relationship that's a bit too tight between the Mayor and the CEO. These things can escalate and staff feel powerless to deal or go up the chain and find a way to address it.
It's probably even worse, as I think we touched on last week, the sort of psychology that comes into play within a council where you've got, in our council, we've had rotating CEOs. It's been almost 2 years of CEOs coming and going, rumours about who was going to get it, whatever else, and then Constance coming in, a complete turnover of directors. And some people have been promoted up. You know what you're getting into, in the sense of being promoted into that environment. And essentially, the pressure is to second guess and not get yourself in strife. And if you're not careful, you can become a co-accused because you're facilitating things that you may know isn't quite right, but you've got to feed your family and you've got to look after your job and whatever else. So you're constantly trying to do this sort of balancing act once it's without getting caught. Or alternatively, trying to do the right thing, but not in a way that's going to draw the hornets from the CEO and the mayor. So it's a very challenging position.
It certainly is. And it probably is testament to why at director level or executive manager level there is turnover, because it becomes difficult in a toxic culture where it's top, and all of these things are top-down driven, obviously, and they lead the culture. So when they lead the culture and the culture is not great, then we have this turnover, which is very expensive for...
I've certainly seen it in the public service, the federal public service, where you have SES officers who occasionally, when things don't go right, are sort of recruited in as the scapegoat to get out. Makes the minister happy. Who did this? Oh, he did it. He's gone. Okay, now let's try and deal with it. So it can be a very short and brutal career at that level.
Yeah, absolutely. But you're remunerated accordingly, let's be honest.
Yeah, that's true. Why I lived the fabulous life that I now lead. And when
it comes up to quitting.
Do you want to just give us an overview of what happens when things go wrong, as they apparently look like they've done in Parramatta?
Yes, that's been an enlightening experience, and I can only hope that many councils around New South Wales have been paying attention to the questions that have been asked of Patricia Connolly, who was the ex-CEO of Parramatta Council. She was
we do have to say here that this evidence is untested. Nobody's being accused of anything at this point. It's simply an information gathering issues. People are presumed to be innocent unless they're proven guilty. And all this has been so far has been the story that's unfolded. It's not, people haven't been charged. People haven't been accused of anything. It's just what's been said. So
an ICAC inquiry by its nature is a public inquiry to test evidence of allegations of cronyism and nepotism. And in actual fact, led by the Chief Commissioner of ICAC, John Hatzigersos, he has been making sure it has stayed within those parameters, and I think has conducted an exemplary public inquiry. And the issues around public inquiry are also being tested today in a joint committee hearing at Parliament over NAC. But going back to the Pink Ladies, as they were called, this was a group of women who had worked in a variety of Sydney councils and had come to rely on each other in Ryde Council and Georges River Council. And there was a particular episode at Georges River Council that kind of led into this Pink Lady Parramatta episode. To wrap it up in a nutshell, the appointments were made inappropriately, one could say. The evidence was tested about cronyism and nepotism. The women had relationships outside of their positions at council, and it's argued that the CEO restructured the entire council area in the executive, particularly working for the mayor and the directors and CEO, and it's arguable certainly from their CVs that had been written for them by the CEO, and she was also on the panel and hadn't had a number of conflicts of interest. So it's definitely testing this idea of cronyism and nepotism, people being appointed perhaps beyond their capabilities, given staggering salaries based on their CVs, and then the control they then took as a group over other staff who had served for a long period of time and had their integrity challenged. And one particular guy who had been eased out of as the chief of staff, had been eased out of the organisation. I say eased as not the word I'd choose to really use, but anyway, he left and the package was somewhat questionable. He resigned, but there was a retrenchment package that was quite substantial that hadn't been declared to the governing body. So the governing body effectively were in the dark about the amount of money that had been expended to push people out of the organisation. This particular fellow decided to run for council, and her fear of him running, because it would mean if he got on council, she would potentially lose her job. So she went into this mad campaign with her pink ladies, it is alleged, and created an email that went around to a number of people, particularly the media, sledging this guy and saying how unsuitable he was to be a councillor. So those things are at the crux of the inquiry, and it's finished now. It went 2 weeks extra. She was questioned, the ex-CEO, for 6 days, and I can only imagine it was withering, because even watching it was tough. The questioning was particularly difficult by the council for Parramatta Council, Mr. Moses, and he took no prisoners on the last 2 days. And if you want to see some serious questioning, I urge people to read the last 2 days of transcripts. Luckily, we have ICAC who are incredibly transparent, and everything, witness lists, evidence, and transcripts are online. So that's the basis for it, and it kind of provides a platform for what we're talking about today.
And so when things go bad, and I see a lot of parallels between allegations that are now being considered or issues being considered by the OLG in relation to our council. In my own opinion, what I'm noticing is it's similar but different in the fact that in the Parramatta case, you had a CEO come in, set up a structure that was essentially, if you like, to really not push aside, but to manage the elected representatives. Whereas in the Haven case, you've got a different scenario where we had I think from what I can see, a very competent CEO, Ms. Robin Stevens, who came in, had recruited under a fairly open process, came in the day before the new council was sworn in. There's a bit of a dispute about what happened, but our local state member, Liza Butler, has made statements in Parliament that it was clear that Robin Stevens was put under a lot of pressure and basically told she was going whichever way it turned out, and she could either take the money or it would be a very unhappy process. So she left. So then there was a series of issues about who was going to take her place, and James Retry was very favoured. He was going to be made redundant by Robin Stevens. There was some communication which I got involved with in a gatekeeper application. We're going to talk about that in the next episode. And ultimately, we then got Andrew Constance. And as we said before, Andrew, ex-Treasurer of New South Wales, Transport Minister, and politically very qualified, but in terms of local government, zilch. I would say he didn't have a degree in anything. Being a minister, and Maree, you can talk about this in a minute, being a minister is completely different than being a CEO, where you need to be on top of all the legislation, all the risks, all the issues, staff management, a very complicated job. And interestingly, we saw that the duty statement and selection criteria were rewritten. And interestingly, it seemed that the main thing we were after was somebody who could talk to the various levels of government. That would probably be a politician, but all the other skills were downplayed. Now, on the 11th of February, and there was a lot of concern in the community about it, on the 11th of February 2026, start of this year, the OLG launched what's known as a Section 430 inquiry under the Local Government Act, and Maree's going to tell us a bit more about the power of that. And it was on a number of issues that were pretty clear. So firstly, the recruitment transparency. For example, originally Matthew Norris was on the selection panel. He was removed in a council meeting, and it was completely a SIG-controlled panel. So they were looking at the consultancy role and record keeping of Stephen Blackadder, a consultancy company that is now under question by OLG. There was issues about conflicts of interest, which I would imagine would be the Mayor's long association and personal friendship and political friendship with Andrew. Maladministration and code of conduct. There were allegedly leaks coming out about the process. Policy and procedure adequacy, whether the policy procedures and training were adequate for how they were to select the CEO. And also the inquiry then rounds off with the great catch-all, any other matter. And I think there are lots of any other matters which may be rolled into the inquiry. So That's signed by the Deputy Secretary, Ashley Hinds, Jag Beering and Julie Wells, being delegated under Section 429, 431, 432 and 434C, for those who are really interested in section numbers of legislation, to conduct the inquiry. So, you want to just give us a bit of background about the powers of these sort of inquiries?
So I think, first of all, harking back to a ministerial office and the vast difference between a CEO of a council and a ministerial office. So in any ministerial office, be it state or federal, you have an office in Parliament and you often have an office outside of Parliament, which is your elected office. That's generally how it happens. There's sets of staff that sit within those. One set of staff deals with electoral matters, more issues around things that are happening within your town, and electorally you take back. But in a ministerial office within the Parliament, you have a group of staff that are the liaison point between your department, because you have a whole department, a department made up of thousands.
Thousands of people, that's right.
So in his instance, he was the Minister for Transport, and he had a large department of transport that were responsible for crap ferries and crap train tracks. We know they, and I say crap, that's probably a lesser description of ferries that weren't suitable, were delayed and cost millions and millions of dollars, and similarly stations that the trains were too wide to roll up on. Now, we can say that's, if we want to say he's got a whole department and a whole set of staff, should we hold them accountable for those mistakes? No, the buck stopped with the minister. He made decisions to approve an enormous amount of expenditure on untested proposals that were put to him by certain corporations. That's the first difference. It's a minister has a staff and a department. Okay, so now take that, and it's very much geared around a particular ministerial portfolio, which in his case was transport. He had held some other portfolios, but that was the cutting edge for him. He didn't do well, obviously. I think that's fair to say. But I think you could say by media reports and by any measure, things that he implemented have been long
controversial.
So now let's take that to the CEO role. And again, this came out of Parramatta and out of Mr. Moses's questioning, is that the governing body is the power base of a council. It rests in the minister, and the government of the time, with a premier or a prime minister, are in control in the other two levels of government. But in this level of government, you have a group of people who have been, again, as I said, elected by the community. And the CEO is meant to take care of the day-to-day operational issues around. So the governing body sets direction. It sets what big projects perhaps have been put before them, and the CEO is to deliver that work. Now, what again came out from the Parramatta, and not only Parramatta, but a number of other inquiries about other councils over the years, is that a CEO or a general manager, when they become too powerful, they start controlling things like tenders, staffing, budgets, and who can see and what can be seen and what can't be seen. And it all comes a cropper when a councillor gets a feeling in their gut that something is not right. And they take it to the CEO, and the bells and whistles and alarms start going off, because some councillors possibly identified that, one, this is a CEO potentially way out of their depth and not with the appropriate experience. You might be able to handle a media conference, but you might not be able to handle a crisis. That could be poor behaviour, could be a blowout of a budget, could be any of those things. But it's a different kettle of fish to be a CEO of a large council with a large budget without a large...
Maree, you're dead right. And what we think fairly, any observation, again, my personal opinion, but a fair observation based on factual events, is that what we've seen here in the Shoalhaven is a mayor in common language spins stories, a political sort of notion of putting the best foot forward and making either vague or broad claims of benefit or whatever else. And we've had Andrew Constance in corporate videos personally thanking the mayor for a great leadership and other bits and pieces. So it's all totally inappropriate. If you look at you don't see the minister, the secretary at a federal level, the secretary coming out saying what a great job the minister's doing. They're supposed to be behind the scenes people. So can we just go back to the 430 and the powers that the 430 has, and how this may bring some of this stuff out into the public?
Yeah, and I think this is very important. The Local Government Act of 1998 is a rather comprehensive and detailed act. But when it comes to poor behaviour, if you like, or challenging what's going on at council, the Local Government Act Section 430 comes into play. And it effectively empowers the CEO of the Office of Local Government. It gives them a certain amount of statutory powers to investigate a council that there has been some referral about behaviour unacceptable to that council. It has a number of blocks to it. First of all, when. So when is a investigation prompted? And that would be where council's conduct, governance, administration is having some kind of serious impact on the community. So that's the first thing. They have to determine when. The second, and that comes from an inquiry somewhere from in the community or perhaps within. The second thing is the scope of the investigation. What does that scope encompass? And sometimes it can encompass the whole of the council's governance generally, or sometimes it could just focus on one particular targeted specific matter, which is where this one of yours sits right now. It sits on a particular governance issue, but it will still, its authority is quite large. It's given a lot of referential power to investigate the building itself, who's in it, what they do, all of the records. They can requisition whatever records they want to make a determination. And I think that's their authority in an investigation is an important part of 430. They are really empowered.
Yeah, I guess in Section 430, the other issue that a lot of people may not understand is that local government isn't a government by itself. It's a constructed entity under the state government. So the state government, so those records that are held by council are in fact state government records. And the management of them, etc., is run through the Local Government Act. So they've gave council this sort of scope to go and play in and do whatever. But at the end of the day, it's the Minister for Local Government that runs the show. It's very much like a Royal Commission. There's compulsory powers. You can't go along and when they say, did you do this, Miss X? She can't say, oh, look, I don't want to answer. Because if you don't want to answer, there's actually criminal penalty for I don't want to answer. And even self-incrimination, you can't claim self-incrimination. You have to answer.
And I think that takes it to the point of what are the possible outcomes of a 430 that I think are very important for our listeners, is that the result of these investigations with a great deal of delegated powers as an authority to look at everything within council, regardless of even if it's just a single thing they're looking for, they still might review the whole of the process, but they'll do a report. But what can happen? It can be a recommendation to improve your governance overall, or it can actually be far more severe and lead to a suspension of the council, and it will go into administration. And from that, they could make a referral then to an ICAC type situation. So the severity is determinant upon how they view their investigation and the outcome of that. So I think that's a very important thing before leading to your specific, the 5 tenets, if you like, of the investigation into Shoalhaven.
I'd say the only thing I'd add there, and this is from personal experience, I think your previous husband, Maree, you mentioned last week, it's quite common for these sorts of agencies, state agencies, to cooperate very tightly. Yeah. So it wouldn't surprise me at all that you'd have perhaps, because both ICAC and OLG are not big organisations. They've got limited resources, and that first bit is really a probing bit. So you've got OLG probing and using its powers. If ICAC is also there, it could be building up a case for you do whatever you're going to do, OLG, but at the end of the day, we're going to take what you've already done and then we're going to pursue the inquiry. Okay, very good. And at that stage, you'd probably have a New South Wales police presence on that inquiry as well. So they'd be working with the lawyers and the staff of ICAC to see if there's sufficient there to take a criminal case forward. So it could be a series of outcomes you could have. You could have an administrator appointed. Some of the councils, if they're found to have been wanting or criminally inclined, could be banned from holding future office. Then you've got the issue of potentially all the dramas that go through the ICAC inquiry, public procedures, as we've seen with Parramatta, and then ultimately it could be criminal prosecution. And if that's significant offences, and corruption is a fairly significant offence because it's a crime against everybody. It's a crime against the community. It's a crime against the rule of law. It's not white-collar crime. It may look like white-collar crime, but when it gets down to the nitty-gritty, jails a jail sentence is a potential if you've been paying money, swaying services or paying people more money out of the public purse and whatever else. So it's quite a complicated issue. I'd much prefer to be commenting on it and being actually in the middle of it. I don't think I'd like to be in the middle of it.
And to that, Commissioner Hatzigoursos in his submission, he actually referred to when public inquiries occur, it triggers an effect. It triggers a flow-in of people calling, referring issues that they think are concerning, and certainly ramps up the number of inquiries and investigations they have to do before they even get to something like the Parramatta Pink Ladies. And I think that is the benefit of the argument that we're continually having and that he articulated very well about transparency. The more transparent these, which is the criticism of the NAC, of course, the more transparency we have in our organisations, the better chance we are of rooting out systemic fraud and the risk management. The other thing he talked about was risk management. So these public inquiries or these inquiries are vital to teach, and his is an educative role he focuses on as well, to teach organisations to better manage risk. Put resources into risk management and stop putting everything at the back end. Let's bring it to the front end where we need to be better managing and working on a prevention program rather than dealing with the fallout.
And as you see, it would also then, these sort of inquiries will generally flow into legislative change. Yeah. So, for example, I worked on many fraud cases where we investigated doctors and found out all sorts of things and how systems were exploited. That then fed back into the department. The department then drafted legislation and went to Parliament, and these issues were closed off. So, for example, one of the many fraud issues was doctors turning their mind to patients being consented to consultation. So if I sat here as a doctor and thought of 50 patients and how well they're doing or not, I could put in a claim for 50 Medicare reimbursements. So the intention of the policy was okay, but the actual people who were going to exploit it, they needed to be cut off. And that's what we'd probably see here. How do you cut off human nature of exploiting systems that are just set up to be exploited by people who have got low morals or low restraint in not doing the wrong thing?
And again, it makes you ask the question about how they get there. The big thing here is we have a system in council where CEOs jump from council to council in a lot of cases, and their profile grows and their network grows, and with them they take a group of people. Now, we're not saying if you're in a senior position it's not a great idea to bring along people you've worked with before who get you, who know how you work, perhaps bring something. But that has still got to go through a transparent recruitment process. And then that perhaps takes us to the subject of Blackadder, which is another part of that investigation. Who he is, where does he come from? And there's a lot of background there too that makes me think about him appointed as the recruiter.
Yeah. We've seen it in the Commonwealth public sector as well, been in the public service for 30 years, and you could watch a deputy secretary gets moved to a department. You then see probably 5 or 6 SES1 end up in the department. Now, that's a bit different because at the SES level, that was the intent of the SES framework, was that they were professional managers. They could manage brain surgery over there. They managed the experts. They were management specialists, not topic specialists. So that was okay, but you would see it, and that was open to abuse as well. You can opportunistically change the selection criteria, you can change the panel, and you can also change. And essentially, it wraps up the whole recruitment process, the selection panel. And we did have one other great gem where on the night of the vote, the mayor had the casting vote that appointed Andrew Constance. There was immediately an attempt to put in a rescission motion, but it appears, I don't know how else it could be done, that there was some message from the mayor to Constance that he'd been appointed and he accepted. So by the time the council went to put the rescission motion in, it was too late because it had been acted upon in under a minute. So that in itself is, you'd have to say, is a bit interesting. So the whole process there's a number of, as we said, about human monkeys exploiting systems. So you can exploit the system by how you manipulate the duty statement, the selection criteria. You can manipulate it by when candidates apply, and if you're talking to them, you can encourage them, or you can generally put them off. Oh, we're in big financial dramas and we could be going broke. We could be going, so and I think it'd be fair to say that the panel that was appointed here was questionable. And this is where we've had two of the panel members, Proudfoot and Wilkins, actually complain about the independent member, a standout person in our community, the commanding officer of Albatross, who was appointed as an independent observer, but remarkably was either away or doing something in his professional career that they then have meetings and make decisions. So he was effectively not an active part of the process when his purpose was to be the good guy with the good eyes and ears. Yeah. And then you've got the consultant. And it's no thing about you don't ask a question unless you know the answer. The question for consultants is you don't employ consultants without knowing what the advice they're going to give you and what cover that applies. Now, that's not alleging anything about Mr. Blackadder and his company, but it's a known fact, and it's come out through inquiries in the Commonwealth that those things have happened. That an idea is there, you find a consultant, you have an initial chat about them, explain what the brief's going to be, and essentially you know that consultant is going to come up with what you want, but you're able to say, we employed world best exports, whether it be, and again, this is naming these companies as having any problems, but it could be Ernst & Young, it could be KPMG, it could be anyone. They give you a bit of cover. So, Maree, in our next episode 3, we're going to be talking about the GIPR Act, effectively the state equivalent of the Freedom of Information Act, and how that can be used to probe these things. Now, I've got a live case there where I actually did probe one of these issues, and I took the council to NCAT, and we had a decision out of NCAT. I didn't get what I wanted. I've got a partial win in terms of the case law, Prothero v Shoalhaven Council. It's currently being interpreted wrongly by the council itself and, I'd say, SafeWork, but I'm going to go back with another one, and I think I can get this refined. And what that's going to do is essentially bind all councils or all agencies in New South Wales to handle inquiries in a particular way. So that's next week, GIPR, and we can talk about how they can be used to shed some light. We're also going to be discussing how councils, in turn, can draw the curtains when you try and shed the light, the sort of manoeuvres they do to keep you out of their business.
And I think that's really important things because they, again, are in control of the information flow. So a GIPR, when you lodge a GIPR, it's not an easy process. It's quite lengthy.
No.
You have to practically provide your firstborn to get one approved and get it in the system. And then they can limit you a variety of ways with not only providing with information, but saying, no, you can only see this part of a video or whatever. It's very difficult. And I do have an interesting case for next week about assault and how the GIPR was handled with TV and an assault case.
Yeah. Okay. That's all for this week, and we thank you for watching. And I'll just hand back to Maree to give our sign-off. So, Maree, thank you for your contribution. Much appreciated. That's all from the gallery.
But anyway, that's all from us from the gallery today. We're looking forward to our next episode. Ciao for now.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Maree. Always great to see you. Thank you.
Cheers.